Hi, folks. Welcome to another episode of Film Study. This is Ken McKusick, and it's time for us to continue our set of season reviews. Tonight, we're going to look at the safety position. Joining me to do that is Spenser Peterson. Spenser, how you doing?
Pretty well, Ken. Not where we'd like to be at the end of the Ravens season here, but overall, outside of that, pretty good.
Yep, we certainly like to be still reporting on playoff football at this time, such is not the case. We're reporting on this and a lot of episodes on the coaching search so far. I have a feeling it's going to be a very trying off season with Harbaugh now, with the Giants probably picking up a lot of ex-Ravens.
Yeah, it is. There is a silver lining in how desirable the Ravens job seems to be throughout the whole search, but that's searching for silver linings, not where we'd like to be at this time. Ideally, we would be talking about a playoff matchup coming up.
And I guess one of the problems that came out today was that Mike McDaniel is apparently going to take the Chargers OC job and is out of the head coaching circle for the Ravens. It just came out about an hour ago, I think.
Oh, I missed that. I did not see that, which he was on my short list of guys I would be super excited about being the offensive coordinator.
Yeah, right. There, that's exactly what I would like to, and apparently it's not going to happen. So Weaver has been in. Minter is going to have an in-person interview, I believe has been said. They're not telling people in advance. They're just telling them when they get conducted, or maybe the day that they're going to be conducted, the day before they're going to get conducted, kind of thing. But anyway, we'll kind of find out as it goes along. And they've interviewed a lot of people for the first time, and we'll see how this plays out.
Without, I know we're here to talk about the safeties, not to derail us too much, but the McDaniel news is news to me. I know there was a big surge in the prediction market odds for Minter. I wonder if that's the residual, McDaniel share just going into his camp there.
Probably. Yeah, probably. I mean, there's been a lot of movement in that market. I've been looking at it, and it's been jumping all over. If you're looking at Kalshi or something, it may be a low volume thing. I'm not sure what the issue is.
Yeah.
All right, let's roll over and talk about the safeties here a little bit. The Ravens' problem for the last couple of years now has been not really having enough players that could be trusted to play the back end or a split field that would allow Hamilton to take the spot where he's most effective, closer to the line of scrimmage. And I noticed somebody in the national media actually is picking up the Ace of Trumps lingo that I've been using for a while. So it's nice and gratifying to know that somebody's listening to the show.
Yeah, and that's not it's common enough parlance in terms of cards, but yeah, you're hitting a couple if statements there that I think someone was probably listening.
Yeah, I'm with you anyway. So tough season in 2025 because they had a lot to try and sift through in terms of bodies. And it just didn't work out. Ardarius Washington lost early in the process to PUP, was actually back amazingly early, played the last 4 weeks of the season. But in terms of the guys who were at camp, they really struggled to find that third guy who could play the back end. And they had Hamilton and Starks were going to be their top two. And then they really struggled to find a third guy. And they weren't even necessarily thinking about moving Hamilton up. At that point, they're probably keeping Humphrey at slot corner. But when they really needed to move Hamilton up to change the whole nature of the defense because everything else was going wrong, then they had to figure out, a way to do it. And that ended up being the trade of Adafe Owe for Alohi Gilman, which I think it's fair to say did not end up particularly well for the Ravens.
Yeah, absolutely. I think two things right off the top. I think the first domino in this season as far as safety is concerned is absolutely Ardarius Washington. Mm-hmm. And two things there. One, when he was lost, I think I was actually on a show with you. I don't know if it was for one of the off-season signings or something else for right around when that news broke. And I was laughing at the notion that he could be back this season. I think Harbaugh said they were looking for a late season return. And that is, it's important to call out when you're wrong. And I was amazed that he was able to make it back for the season for, no matter how his play was, just that he set foot on an NFL football field after that injury is incredible. So go ahead.
I completely agree, and I didn't expect it to be back. And I'm sorry, you're responding to the other part of that.
Oh, I was just going to say, with respect to him being the first domino, the timing was super unfortunate there. Just, I think it was early May, like the second week of May, maybe, when he had that injury about 2 weeks after the draft. The timing couldn't be worse. Obviously, you feel for the guy. You don't want him to be injured, but if you could have your choice of what had happened, it would be prior to the draft, prior to free agency. A lot of criticism, and some of it warranted, about the team not doing enough to have an additional safety that they felt comfortable playing the back end. But just from a timing perspective, to have that injury happen that you couldn't have banked on at the time of the draft, at the time of early free agency, just very unfortunate in that regard.
Yeah, absolutely. And they thought they had some additional possibilities that work out. Kane and Brade were back, and both of them ended up getting cut. Brade was cut with the final 53. Kane was cut during the season after 6 weeks. Kane, there was talk at camp that he had distanced himself, and I'll say I probably was falling for this too, that he kind of distanced himself from the other candidates in terms of being the third safety that they could depend on. And you really, if you want to play the way the Ravens do, you almost have to have 5 safeties, including Hamilton. You're going to have 4 that you use on any one play, and I'm including Ardarius in that group as a safety, though you might consider him a slot corner. You got to have 2 other to play the back end. You've got to have whoever you primarily want to play the slot. You got to handle Hamilton for the dime, and then you got to have one more in case anybody gets hurt. And you just can't put yourself in the position where you have to alter your set of defensive packages that you use regularly by having an injury. One injury affects you. Now, you have 2 injuries in a game, all bets are off. You're going to have to do something to adjust to make things work. But you have 1 injury, that's exactly what your 48-man roster is supposed to protect you from.
Yeah, the second scenario you talked about there is sort of the Tom Moore school of, if Peyton Manning goes down, we're effed and we don't practice effed kind of thing. There's not much you can do in that respect. But I don't want to make this a show about the coaching and referendum on the prior years of coaching, but that is one, I think, qualm I have had about the Harbaugh back end of the roster construction. And obviously EDC is responsible for the roster, but I think Harbaugh has a huge say on, game day activations and the last 5 or so spots of the roster, who makes it. And this idea that you're rostering to the 53 defensive backs or other positions, in multiple of them, that you don't feel comfortable putting on the field for defensive play rather than, special teams specialization or special teams only. It is one place I've been a little bit bothered with the roster construction.
Yeah, I absolutely agree with that, by the way. I'll just plug this right now. We have an episode coming out a little later this week with Matt Ruff, whose topic is the ideal 48-man roster on game day. And I played along. I mean, he did it, and I did another version of it. You only really have about 2 players that you really have a choice on. I think the absolute minimum that I want at every position group is pretty well set across all the 11 or 12 position groups, however you want to define it. And then you really only have about 2 extra spots that you could, okay, maybe I take a wide receiver today, or maybe I take a corner today, or you're thinking about how does the players fit on special teams. And the Ravens just violated that like crazy this last year. Some of it because the players were hurt. That's certainly the case early in the year when they had a whole bunch of walking wounded on their inactive roster. People they really couldn't depend on to play at all. And that will happen. So I'm not really blaming them for that. I'm blaming them on there just weren't enough total solutions. The other guy who made the 53, but then was cut very early was Ruben Lowry, who was a big, exciting player in camp and had a good preseason, had interception in one of the games. It was Cowboys. I think he had the room service kind of backing up interception in the end zone. But then, he played against the Chiefs and really got exposed. And they cut him shortly after that. I think they thought he would make it through the practice squad. Maybe they get a second chance at him. Nope, the Colts pick him up. So really bad year for the Ravens, getting poached up and down the roster in terms of their talent on the fringe.
Yeah, absolutely. And not to take us too far afield, but there's a couple places you can get away with, a Jake Hummel type, maybe, who's a special teams ace and just a guy, but you can put on the field for linebacker play. It's hard. You'll have a hard time convincing me that you're not better off putting a safety that you're comfortable putting on the field and trying to get him to play some special teams versus a special teams only guy who you don't want to put on the field for defense.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, and some of the stuff they did was even more egregious, having David Ajabo active as a fifth outside linebacker when you could have a fourth defensive lineman instead. And that's sort of ridiculous crap. I mean, it's just stuff that I can't easily stomach.
And I'll say it again, not to take us too far afield, but that's the sort of thing that in my day job in the consulting world, where you push a leader or an organization to take a step back and think about, what are we really solving for here? We've gotten to the nth iteration of, we're talking about this topic at a more granular degree that we've lost sight of what is the big picture here.
Right.
Like, what ultimately are we pushing for as an organization? And this sort of violates that principle.
Right. Yeah, I completely agree with that. I think a lot of people can see that probably in their own work as to losing sight of the forest for the trees is the I guess the metaphor that's typically used. All right. The new face was Starks. He took over as the free safety, round 1 pick. I don't think his season was that bad. We're going to talk about him individually, but he certainly didn't jump off the field in terms of his making a bunch of big plays right off, which is what you would hope for with a safety that is thought to be a top 10 pick by many national pundits and didn't really end up having any of the splash value that Emin Wari had, certainly, and even that Xavier Watts did. Xavier Watts didn't have a great statistical season, but he had 5 interceptions.
Yeah, I think I'm still very positive on Starks' future. Mm-hmm. I think, unfortunately, his season is a little bit of a metaphor for the Ravens season as a whole, in that I believe it was, and correct me if I'm wrong here, but I believe it was the very first drive of that Buffalo game. He had an almost interception on Josh Allen.
Dropped it.
And very close to the end of that Pittsburgh game, he had an almost interception on Rodgers. And it's just, I can't think of and it's not fair to him, but I can't think of one player that better encapsulates sort of the misfortunes of the 2025 Ravens season than that, in terms of missed opportunities. And again, maybe we look at a season differently if both of those plays went the other way. But again, I'm still high on his future, but definitely did not perform to maybe a very higher degree than what maybe his median expectation would have been as a rookie.
Yeah. I mean, one of the things he did is stay healthy. So I don't want to beat on the guy too much. So as soon as you do that and you play more snaps than any other defender, that's a good place to start. At least they trusted you for most of the season. And there were some things we'll talk about when we get to Starks. I don't think his season was terrible. I am still high on him in terms of what he could do. I just don't think he was as impactful as some of the other safeties in the draft who are much more economical picks. So,
and absolutely not. I don't want this to be construed at all as I'm beating on his season. It's more the those are very in your face, disappointing plays or plays that didn't happen that could have happened. I think at times, and we've talked about this before, free safety can be a difficult position to evaluate, just because the lack of things happening is almost more important at times than things happening. So it can be difficult to actually to measure. But I am still, overall positive on him. I don't want this to be construed as beating on him. Just there are a couple, again, poorly timed at the very beginning of the season and very end of the season that feel like they encapsulate some of my overall feelings of the season.
All right. The Ravens, again, a lot of single high and a lot of too high shell, a lot of rotation out of a too high shell when they're trying to disguise coverages. The Ravens way under Orr, it probably will not be exactly the same. It certainly will not be exactly the same with the next defensive coordinator. It's one of the fun things always, look at the first few games when you have a new defensive coordinator, see how different things are. But the Ravens will look different this year. I really doubt they're going to have the shortage of safeties that they've had in past seasons. I think that DeCosta probably will not allow that to happen, given Hamilton's season and how important it is for them to keep him up front. I don't think they're going to run into this problem again. And in fact, I think it's one of the reasons why you have to think about a move of Marlon Humphrey to safety, which I think will be the Ravens' probably their biggest decision this offseason is whether or not they're going to move him there.
Yeah, absolutely. I think the fortunate thing is they probably have a couple very near-in moves they can make that between potentially moving Marlon. Ardarius probably doesn't have a huge market outside of Baltimore. I mean, he's probably more valuable to Baltimore on a reasonable contract than almost anywhere else. If you draft a safety that you feel good about developmentally, you have Starks, then you start to get into having 4 potential options on the back end, not counting Hamilton. And that's, a path to having something you feel good about going into 2026.
Yeah, absolutely. And it then might even become a question of, do you really want to keep 5 pure safeties plus Ardarius kind of thing, which I think would be possible on this roster, given the fact that they use 3 safeties on almost every play. So it's not a terrible idea. And Keandre Jackson is a player who deserves some real acknowledgement for the great season he had on special teams that we're going to talk through on this. Again, frustrating sometimes that you have these players who are taking up a game day active spot, but the problem really wasn't him. They could have activated one more safety if they had one more safety on the roster, and they had ways that they could make that happen with, frankly, number 90 being the biggest guy who could have been cut a little earlier.
Yeah, absolutely. And Keandre Jackson, very much like what I saw out of him. He made splash plays when he was on special teams. And I think there's still a little bit of hope that you could get something there more in the Anthony Levine mold. Don't mean to put those expectations on him, but a guy who can have a role on defense potentially, versus it being, this is a special teamer that I'm never going to play on defense.
I think that's a very reasonable expectation for a player like Jackson. He's played a little bit of back end. He maybe could play dime someday if the need arises for him to take that role. Maybe Hamilton's hurt or something else. I don't know that he'd ever be a guy who could jump in and play the slot corner role, but he could be a guy I think you could have. I mean, the Ravens have played Daryl Worley on the back end and gotten tremendous value out of him. They played Anthony Levine at dime and gotten tremendous value out of him. I think the Ravens certainly have a history of being able to make something out of these safeties. If you look at Ozzie Newsome's history, some of the most economical picks he made in his entire history were safeties in round 6, 7, or UDFAs, or very cheap free agents too. Corey Harris was a very cheap free agent, for example, that have really worked out well.
Yeah, hard for my money to get better than the run of Will Demps to Dwan Landry in terms of economical back-end safeties to pair with Ed Reed. That
was a remarkable run. That was about 9 years in there. They had those two.
Yeah, I think an undrafted guy and a 6th rounder. And like you said, 5th rounder? Okay. Yeah, 9 years of rookie contracts for 1 5th-round pick is pretty darn good, and probably actually had a net benefit when, I forget if Will Demps went somewhere for a free agent contract, but Dwan Landry definitely did. But again, probably net positive draft capital as a result.
Yeah, that actually is probably true. The discounting of the years wouldn't work out, but it's still probably net positive draft capital. You rarely get that, and particularly when you get such high quality play for those seasons. All right, let's move on. Talk about Kyle Hamilton specifically. He returned to AP1. He was AP2 in 24, AP1 in 23. He was actually this year on the fringe of the Defensive Player of the Year discussion with some of the things he did. He didn't end up being anywhere in that discussion, but extended through the 2030 season at approximately $25 million of AAV. Excitement on a level of 1 to 10 with that signing.
A 9, with the only delta from 10 being that it's, the market setting deal. Right. If somehow they had threaded the needle of it being a Travis Jones-esque, bargain deal somehow, when you're, I know the way you bucket players when you have at market, basically anyone who's on a second deal is at market, but there's guys like Travis Jones that tempt you to push them to cap value or whatever the right nomenclature is there. Yeah. But again, the only drawback on the excitement was that it wasn't, that it was a market setting deal, which it naturally was going to be, but that's the only thing that backs me off of a 10 completely on that.
Okay, I'm in the same spot. Just very excited to have one of the best players in the game signed for long term, and it's a contract I don't think will come back to bite them. Obviously, a lot of that's going to be in how much they roll those dollars forward on a continual basis, and I certainly am a person who hopes they don't do that extensively. Um, it just something that frustrates me is always treating the cap like a 1 year problem is a good way to ruin yourself, ruin your franchise in terms of what's going on. All right, play on the back end for Hamilton. It was good enough earlier in the season, but his play at slot corner was just ridiculously good. He immediately took over at a higher level when they moved him there, and I think it was week 6, might have been week 5. They moved him to the slot. Coverage stats were off a little bit this year. 112.5 opposition passer rating, 3 touchdowns, no interceptions, and 7.7 yards per target. But he made so many spectacular downhill plays, tackling on the pass, beating blocks on the edge, showing the great leverage as a pass rusher. I think it more than made up for it. A very good tackling year as well.
Yeah, the 7.7 yards per target is probably more telling than the passer rating. I think the passer rating is an artifact of, and not that this is something you don't want, but it's a little bit of an artifact of not having any picks. If he had an interception, that would look a lot better. But
yep,
yeah, super thrilled with what he did this year.
Yeah, and if you're looking at the yards per target, he was in a lot better shape earlier in the season. The Malik Willis pass alone really hurt his yards per target for the year. That probably might be responsible for close to 1 yards per target. I gotta have to look at his total targets again to see how many he had. But the other thing that was really great about his game was the 33-8 stops to miss tackle ratio. That's a 4.1 to 1 relationship, which you don't see in a safety very often. He played a mix of off ball and on ball stuff, more on ball. That's still an outstanding factor there. So very few safeties will put up a 7.1% missed tackle rate either, which is where he was. And to give you an idea, let's see, Ardarius, when he last really played regularly, was at, well, he's a 14.7% career missed tackle rate. Gilman was 16.5% last year. Starks was, and took a step back, we'll talk about that, had a 13.3% missed tackle rate. So Hamilton really stood out in bold relief against the Ravens' other tacklers this year. They did have some pretty good tackling, by the way, at inside linebacker, but they didn't at safety.
Yeah, and we're talking about Hamilton's lack of interceptions this year, talking about his stops versus missed tackle ratios. It's easy to throw around this term or this phrase that the box score doesn't fully capture the impact of a player. I think you can point to some very discrete things and say that's true of Hamilton. You see the intentional groundings, you see the balls thrown into the dirt when he's coming as a pass rusher. You see the way he stacks up and demolishes screens to his side of the field, which will often show up as a tackle, but that's a very different stuffing of the tackle numbers in the box score versus a safety who's catching a bunch of tackles 8 to 10 yards downfield. I think his raw stats do not do justice the impact he has on the game. And I think it's visible or obvious to anyone who's watching him that he disrupts.
Right. I would agree. And I think there's in division, there's 2 quarterbacks who really wanted to avoid Kyle Hamilton, and particularly Rodgers and Burrow really wanted to throw away more to the ex-receiver side than to the strong side of the field, because they want to avoid the possibility of Kyle Hamilton blowing up screens, even to the extent they were doing these little swing passes to extension of the run game kind of things they would try and do. They would really try and avoid Kyle Hamilton when they could. So anyway, one of the greats, we don't need to spend a lot of time talking about him. I think he certainly met his expectations in this season and exceeded them. Wouldn't be fair to have an all-pro 1 expectation of him every year. And he played a high percentage of snaps, even though he was kind of constantly fighting through injury this year. May have had some issues with the back end, although I think in the case of the Malik Willis lost coverage down the middle of the field against Green Bay, I think it was just a case of he forgot what his assignment was and decided not to drag that seam any further. And by the way, I don't think there's anything he could have done about it. I think it would have been a touchdown pass thrown over his head had he tried to drag that any better.
Yeah, that's fair. And I think there's not much else to be said there. Great player. And like you said, hard to put more than hard to put an all pro one expectation on any given year. I don't think that's a fair expectation to place. And I think the only knock or qualm I have about Kyle Hamilton is that, he does seemingly get nicked up, every other game. It feels like he comes off, but comes right back on after a play or two taken off. That's not that's not to disparage him or anything like that. It's just what worries me a little bit about having the value tied up in that player.
I think if I had something similar to that, it would be the fact that he's now suffered a concussion or two. It might just be one in the playoff game, or effectively the playoff game in week 18. He took a hit to the head, left the game, and the Ravens they couldn't do it without him. They completely fell apart defensively without Kyle Hamilton. They had a chance. Lamar almost willed them to the victory, but it would have been very tough to do it. They didn't really have anything left defensively without Hamilton there. All right, Ardarius Washington returned week 15, played only slot corner and dime packages, so he didn't really see a lot of different activity. They could certainly use him again at a combination of slot corner and either free or strong safety. It really just would be a half field role. I'd be looking for him to take on the back end. Could play single high if they needed him to. But he's a guy who not a great tackler. We'll start with that, but very physical. So he still is an impactful pass rusher coming off the slot. Did quite a bit for the Ravens, even if the 4 weeks he was back, even though he wasn't perfect by any means.
Yeah, he's a guy who, despite his size, is, I think you called it a nose-in player. Mm-hmm. He is throwing his body in there. He's taking on guys. I mean, I was gonna say guys larger than him. Basically, everyone on the field is larger than him. Yeah. But in the limited role he had in those 4 weeks back, 3 or 4 weeks back, rushing the passer, I think he got a sack or two and maybe a forced fumble. Just love what you see out of that guy. Is a guy I would be thrilled to have back. Versatility, and that's something to be said for. If you have Marlon as a safety, you have Ardarius Washington back there, maybe that gives you a little more flexibility to carry 5 safeties, because in the event of a game day injury at outside corner, those are guys who can step up in an emergency and play a role in the front. If you need to, even with 1 or even 2 injuries that thin out your secondary depth.
Yeah, I agree. I think that's part of the value of moving Marlon to safety is the inevitability. And I would call it exactly that. I don't think there's any question that they will at some point have to call on Humphrey to play corner in 2026 if they retain him as a safety. I just like, what are the odds that he could get through a full season playing safety only for this team and for any team, frankly, with all the injuries that occur at cornerback in the National Football League?
Yeah, absolutely. And I think both Marlon and Ardarius give you the ability, not that this is the rarest skill set in the world, but safeties who can come up and play the nickel as well allows you to over-index on the outside guys, and you don't need to, not that you would necessarily recommend this, but don't need to carry multiple slot-only corner types.
Yeah, I'm with you. And they did, that is, unfortunately, the Ravens have been a team that has been very aggressively pursued additional outside corners over the years, and to almost to an extreme degree coming into the last couple seasons, they've had like pretty much all outside corners. They drafted a couple guys in Kane and Longerbeam who probably were both going to play on the outside. Longerbeam had a chance to maybe play in the slot, but Kane was going to be an outside guy again. Tampa's an outside guy purely. Awuzie is, could they have fit him in the slot? Maybe. I don't think he's exactly perfect for the role. But it did fine on the outside, so you wouldn't even want him there. Nate Wiggins, you wouldn't want in slot. You definitely be wasting him there. They've accumulated a bunch of these guys who are outside corners with very few slot guys. Now, unfortunately, I think they have a number of slot guys. I think it's gone the opposite direction because Keon Martin played pretty well this year. Ardarius Washington, if he returns, they have this issue with Marlon Humphrey. You look at him now and you say, well, he could play slot corner, I think, but I don't know if he can play outside corner anymore. So it's kind of slot corner or safety. And then you have Ardarius, who is another guy you wouldn't want to play on the outside just because of his size.
Yeah, and honestly, from a roster building perspective, I'd be completely fine with that. Of Martin being your one true slot, a bunch of safeties, and then Kyle Hamilton, you bank on being in that kind of nickel hybrid role every down, and I'm good with that. Then load up on outside guys. That's the rare skill set. Great.
Yeah, and that usually takes significant draft capital to get those outside guys who are any good, but they'll probably try again. The Coney on longer beam will be back. They'll be fighting for their positions again, and there would be in year 2, so it's a real waste of time, developmental time in seeing what they are and what the chances are. I think the guy who probably should step up into a bigger role this year is Tampa. I expect him to be an earlier guy off the bench, and some of that will depend on what they do from outside the organization in terms of trying to pick anybody up. But that'll be an interesting solution. Let's go back to Washington though for a second. What's your number for Washington? How would you see compensating him for either this year or for a multi-year deal?
Probably easiest to talk about in terms of a 1-year deal. I feel really, really, really good about it. If it's a $3.5 million for 1-year deal, I think I'm kind of indifferent to it. If it's $5-ish million for 1 year and anything more than that, I'm it's been great. Okay. Good luck at your next stop. And I think that's where I am. And not because I don't like him as a player, but more from all of the other things that have to happen on the roster. It just becomes allocation of scarce resources is the question.
Right. And I would agree. You need to be careful about that. I think in a weird way, his future with the Ravens may be tied to Patrick Ricard of all people. Ricard, if he were to go to the Giants, which I don't think is a low probability at all. In fact, I think Harbaugh already probably is dreaming about the possibility of Ricard and Scatabo being in the same backfield. But anyway, the notion being that if he went to the Giants, then the Ravens have all of their VSB dollars essentially free again, which is about $1.5 million extra they can pay. And Washington is one of the players who could be eligible for that. So he could be paid probably pretty close to $3 million with the just paying him a vet min salary plus that VSB. So that I think that would be a very good use of it. Now he's not the only one who can get it, but he's one of the really important ones. So they'll have to think about does that make sense or not? In theory, you want another really ridiculous one, or really one that people would really throw their arms up would be if Daniel Falele can't find work easily, and they give him a 1-year deal at about $3 million. Now, first of all, I don't think that's going to happen. I think Falele is going to have suitors. I think he's going to get a contract in the mid range, and he's probably a multi-year deal that'll secure his future. But if he can't find that, if the Ravens fan slander has taken his market value down enough, then coming back to the Ravens for 1 year for $3 million actually would be, it might fill a very significant depth hole for the Ravens, even if he's not the starter.
Well, I have it on good authority from the loud contingent of Ravens fans that his 5th Pro Bowl alternate is what's going to pull the wool over everyone's eyes, that he was a quality player. But no, in all seriousness, I not to take us off track here, but I think a lot of fans are going to be shocked by how much money he makes relative to their expectation on the open market. But that's a whole different conversation.
All right, let's let it die right there. Malaki Starks. I looked back at what I'd said about him in the expectation series. I always just like to do that anyway. But in Starks' case, I think he pretty much exactly met the 60th percentile season, a good season for what I had. And, it's a fairly low expectations bar. He certainly cleared it by a mile in terms of health. He might not have cleared it in some other ways. The big way was he did lead the Ravens defenders in snaps with 98.2%. Didn't really have the immediate impact as a playmaker that we were hoping for, though.
Yeah, I think maybe before I get into that, I do want to say I think there's a tremendous amount of value, and I have a lot of respect for you kind of pre-registering your expectations for players. I think there's, that's something people don't do nearly enough in any form of punditry is, what do you expect going in? And then before having a reaction to it, pre-registering that prediction such that your reaction after the fact can be grounded in something. So I think there's an incredibly valuable exercise there, first of all. But fully agreed that you draft a free safety in the first round. You'd like to see a lot more splash plays, namely interceptions. Excuse me. It can be a hard position to grade at times or evaluate, just because, again, ideally there's a lot of unobserved things happening, throws not happening to a spot of the field. And I think you've mentioned previously on another show that the coverage grades for the inside linebackers are potentially a secondary indicator that there's something going right at the safety level. But again, you ideally want to see from a first round safety, a free safety, regardless, a lot more in terms of, interceptions, pass breakups is ideally what comes through.
Yeah. He had some nice downhill plays in terms of tackling. But he wasn't the tackler he was at Georgia. He had a 6.9% career missed tackle rate there, and he's at 13.3% this year. The median, by the way, of all safeties is about 11.4%. So it's not as good as an inside linebacker, generally speaking. You would, I guess, not expect that. But still, even at 13.3, he's well ahead of Gilman at 16.4 and Ardarius Washington 2024, who was 15.0, and he's about 14.7 career. So any way you look at it, I think Starks's tackling was better than the alternatives, but not up to what they hoped from the draft. All right. There's one kind of troubling thing about Stark's season is they every day, companies you've never heard of are making millions off your personal data. Your name, address, phone number, even details about your family are pulled from public records on the internet, then sold without your consent. There's an entire marketplace built on your privacy, and most people have no idea it exists. Aura fights back. Aura removes your personal data from broker sites and keeps it off. Aura also alerts you fast if your information shows up in a breach or on the dark web. But Aura is more than just a data broker removal system. It's a full digital security suite that protects every part of your online life. Aura gives you a VPN to stay private, antivirus to block threats, a password manager for safer logins, and spam call protection to shut down scammers. Aura scans the dark web for your most sensitive information and notifies you instantly if anything is exposed. And if your identity is ever stolen, you're backed by up to $5 billion in insurance and 24/7 US-based fraud support. Other service charges about the same, but only cover one or two areas. Aura gives you everything: data broker removal, identity and credit monitoring, device protection, and fraud support, all in one simple app. Aura removes what's already exposed, protects what's not, and puts you back in control. Go to aura.com/remove for complete digital protection and peace of mind. That's aura.com/remove.
Let me tell you about the online cannabis company that's changing the game, Mood.com. They created an entirely line of functional gummies, 100% federally legal THC blends, discreetly delivered right to your doorstep. And here's the best part. You can get 20% off your first order at Mood.com with the promo code RAVENS. Now, I've tried a bunch of their gummies myself. Each one's totally unique. The Sleepy Time gummies knock me out right away. They help me unwind fast, leave me refreshed the next morning. The Epic Euphoria gummies, they're perfect for when your day just isn't going the way you want it to go. What makes Mood special is how they pair the THC with natural herbs and adaptogens. You won't find blends like this at any local shop. They've got gummies designed for focus, relaxation, clarity, even energy, all made from cannabis grown on small, family-owned American farms. No pesticides, no shortcuts, just high-quality weed you can trust. Plus, Mood backs everything with a 100-day satisfaction guarantee. So head on over to Mood.com, check out their amazing selection, and don't forget to use the promo code RAVENS at checkout to save 20% off your first order.
Acquired Gilman, and it was Gilman who would stay on the field in the base package as opposed to Starks, which I found really strange when it started happening. I thought of Alohi Gilman more of a pure strong safety than really much of a free safety. I know it can be sometimes difficult to decide who's got that primary role, to determine who's got that primary role, because you do a lot of different coverage things, and there's a fair amount of cover zero thrown in, and you're trying to disguise in terms of who's the single high, and you may start with two and go to one, and all the things. But in Malaki Starks' case, Gilman's case, I didn't see enough positive from him that he should have been on the field over Starks. And the fact that he wasn't, and the coaches thought, well, this is the right thing to do, kind of bothered me in terms of what else is going on with Starks relative to Gilman, maybe in the position group role.
Yeah, I have trouble coming up with a Steelman version of why that might be. There's a world where you could say, okay, if Gilman had been here for the last 3 years, there's a world where you say, okay, the rookie, when Hamilton moves to the back end and there's only 2 safeties on the field, maybe you take the rookie off the field or something like that. But that obviously doesn't hold up given that Gilman came mid-season. Again, like you said, thinking of Gilman maybe a little bit more like a strong safety rather than a true free safety, or however you want to frame that. I have trouble coming up with the narrative or the through line of why that might be, even in the most
or why it's a good thing.
Exactly. Like this is why this is happening, and you're just not thinking about it the right way. Like I have trouble constructing that inference chain.
Yeah. I'm in the same.
Other than that, there's a concern potentially with Starks, like you said, that there's something happening in the meeting room or the position room or in practice that is giving coaches pause to say this guy is the actual better option.
Right. Yeah. I think you could probably be interesting to throw this out on Twitter and see how many different and even potentially like they'd be a 2 or a 3 in terms of credibility excuses you could get for him. In terms of, well, there's the rookie wall. You're not considering that, Ken. And, it'd be funny to throw that out there once and say, anybody come up with reasons why Gilman's in there over Starks at the end of the year as the, base defense free safety. I think excuses would be made available. I'd just be interested to hear it. Maybe some of it is on Orr for not judging correctly the talent between the two of them. That hey, Starks is a better tackler, even though Gilman can do some other things and stay in position correctly. He just can't do that much when he's there. It could be something like that you could pin on Orr. And if I saw that, I'd probably give that a 2 or 3 credibility in my mind in terms of a scale of 1 to 10 in terms of what it is. So anyway. Not really worth a lot of discussion since it's not a ton of snaps, and he only missed 1.8% of the snaps. And the Ravens didn't play a lot of base defense, obviously. But when they did late in the season, which was very much not often, then he was typically out of there. All right, coverage metrics were not good for him, and this was the problem in his last year at Georgia too. Is that his yards per target were not good. He'd given up about 8 yards per target in his career at Georgia, 9.3 this year, and a 99 opposition passer rating, which is not good, but it's not enough worse than average that I'm, throwing my arms up. I mean, Hamilton was 112, and I still think he had a good coverage year. But there is a difference in that Pro Football Reference will give him more of the targets between level 2 and level 3. And there he showed up with 9.8 yards per target, which is worse by half a yard, but a better passer rating. And I'm not exactly sure why that is, but he might have made some tackles immediately on some plays that were for 6 and 8 yards, but somehow behind the linebackers. It's actually hard to figure how that could occur, but there would have been some incompletes there too, but it's only 6 passes additionally was the other thing.
Yeah, the weighting of passer rating in this, when Lamar was at the end of the 2024 season, this came up a little bit when people were trying to calculate what the passer rating he needed to set the all-time record was. Mm-hmm. It is not a simple average. It is weighted between the components. So,
right, of course.
Well, you say of course, but I don't know if everyone's tracking that.
You're right. I'm sorry. You're explaining to the other people. Yeah. Okay.
Just that the various components of it, which I believe are yards per attempt, completion percentage, touchdown percentage, and interception percentage.
That's right.
Each have a weighting, and there's a maximum value you can get for each of them. Mm-hmm. I believe I'm probably off on this, but it's something like 12.5 yards per attempt, 75 or 80% completion percentage.
It's like 77.5, I think.
10% touchdown percentage, and 0% obviously for interceptions. Mm-hmm. But it's possible to be above any one of those those components. And if you do worse in a subsequent game, that it can actually, your passer rating can still improve. And it's hard to describe verbally if you don't know the components, but the point being that there is a part here where, let's say, one very long touchdown, to put it very simply, one very long completion out of those 6 passes has a disproportionate weight on bringing up the yards per target, but brings down the completion percentage in a way that is depressing that passer rating, such that you get this paradox where yards per target goes up and passer rating comes down.
That is certainly possible. I have let's put it this way. I've seen games, and this is at the bottom end of the scale instead of the top end of the scale. Well, you have 2 quarterbacks for the opponent, and one has an 8 rating and the other has a 12 rating, and together they had a 4 rating. That kind of thing can happen because you're outside the box on interceptions, say, and one guy's inside the box, one guy's outside the box, and the guy who's outside the box is canceling out some infinitesimal positive value the other guy had for not throwing interception, or not throwing as many as the maximum number of interceptions allowed.
Right. But I guess the simple reason here being, like, that is why it's not a incomprehensible reason that yards per target can go up and passer rating can go down without interceptions being thrown into the mix, because there's something happening with completion percentage or something else in the way that passer rating gets calculated.
Yeah. Could be a difference of a touchdown also charged to his record by PFF and not by PFR.
Fair.
So it's 46 and 40 are the targets, but that doesn't mean there's exactly 6 targets that PFR had that were not PFF targets. It means that there's a non-overlap by a net of 6 targets that is different from the 2. Yeah. You probably get that in consulting work some. Actuarial work, it comes up all the time. We had one guy in our department who would always, yell it out in the same voice each time. Well, just because that number is not off by very much, how do you know it's not $1 million off in this direction, $1 million off in the other direction for some other reason?
Yeah. Yes, it very much comes up in my former life as an accountant, in my current life as a consultant, trying to, size markets and things like that. I won't bore the listeners with it, right. But yes, exactly the same thing of, yeah. Are you just capturing the delta or the absolute sways and all that good stuff?
Particularly troublesome in accounting work, I'm guessing, if you can't match to either side of the ledger, because then you're really bothered by, I don't know if I have the right number, and then I don't know how much it's off by on both sides. And then particularly if you're looking at somebody else's model for something in actuarial work, you really don't know if they tried to make it look that way so that the net difference was not big, so that you ended up with an offset that approximately ended up being to 0, which is a way to make your expected earnings or make a bonus level that you expect, because those models are very opaque to any stock analysts and whatnot that might come and look at them.
Yeah, absolutely.
All right.
And just quickly on Starks' targets, I know you've compared him previously to some of the other I wouldn't say highly drafted, but maybe top half of the draft safeties. And a lot of them have, maybe with the exception of Amore, slightly worse. If you look at Watts and a few others, some of those coverage metrics are actually worse. Mm-hmm. Not to necessarily happy talk Starks' season, but any sense of, beyond the metrics themselves, just the raw targets, only asking because it's a position where it can be, magnified by big plays, given that it's the last line of defense, so to speak. And, there's a difference between if he's routinely being abused for 20-yard completions versus, people took the shots when they were there, but, otherwise he was, putting a cloud over the top of the defense. Just curious to know if you have a sense of that.
Well, let's look at some of that. I mean, Tony Jefferson had one of the great seasons of anybody. And the guy who has the most snaps per target is another Charger, Marcus Williams.
Oh, wow.
Has the fewest snaps per target. So right there, I'd say there's already a question about what's going on. But Xavier Watts was 20.8 per snaps per target. So that's very good. And it was actually 15th. I'll limit this to guys who played 50% of the time. Okay, so then Marcus Williams is out of there. Xavier Watts moves up to number 2 at 20.8 snaps per target. Andrew Makuba, who had some other problems, only one every 19.2. Xavier McKinney, one people remember his name from the Patrick Queen draft, 18.9 snaps per target. Geno Stone was at 17.7. He was 10th. Malaki Starks is 14th in that list. That's one every 16.6. Now that's in a group that totals 65. So that's pretty good. On that, included in that list is Nick Emanwari, who's at one target every 6 passes. Okay, which seems on the surface bad, but he was allowing, barely 6 yards per target for the season. So he can get away with that, certainly, in terms of what he did. Starks is overall, well, we know the passer rating against him, where that fits in. There were better, and there were a lot worse. He came in at 37th out of 65 in terms of passer rating against. So, there were worse guys, but I'm sorry, check that out. Reverse that. That's from worst to best. So in terms of where he is, he's actually 29th out of 65. So, 55th percentile kind of thing.
Yeah, and honestly, if we're being sober about the season and how he performed as a rookie, even all but a first rounder, but back portion of the first round, being right in the middle average starting safety is not the end of the world. That's something that you can work with.
Yeah. He's a guy who has a lot of runway. The Ravens have an extra year of an option on him that'll be economical. So they'll have 5 years, not 4. So it's something to be excited about. All right, let's move on. Talk a little bit about Alohi Gilman. By the way, no change in Starks' position entering 26, right? You'd keep him at free safety and just roll the dice to the extent you are. You're not trying to draft another pure free safety?
Never say never, no. But I would not go into the draft with that being my objective. If, the next Ed Reed is there available at the Ravens pick, sure. But no, the goal would not be necessarily, the plan going into the draft in my mind to get another free safety. I think the one wild card here, and let's not take ourselves down the coaching carousel discussion, but obviously new coaches coming in does give a little bit of shakeup to incumbency and who's got the inside track on what spots and all of that. But if it's my decision, yes, he is the free safety week 1 of the 2026 season as we sit right now.
All right. Alohi Gilman played 749 snaps over those last 12 games, allowed 10.3 yards per target, which is a full yard worse than Starks, 114.4 opposition passer rating. That's all using PFF targets. His career, by the way, has been bad. 9.6 yards per target was worse than Starks' rookie year, and 10.2 by PFR as opposed to the 9.6 is a PFF number. So the acquisition of Gilman, if you're trying to defend it in some way, I think the only way I can come to that was a pretty good move, was the fact that they dumped some cap and they made space in a year where they didn't end up making the playoffs. On the other hand, I think they might have made the playoffs if they had Odafe instead of Gilman.
If they had the Odafe that was in Los Angeles, yes. I agree.
Yeah. Obviously something we need to be careful about there. Ravens didn't improve with him on the field. Their yards per play and yards per pass were both similar and a little higher with Gilman on the field. Not massively so, but when you think about the games that Gilman missed, they were those early season games where the defense was really banged up, and you'd expect that the defense would have been playing even worse then. But as it played out, they actually played a little bit worse with Gilman on the field. Do you see a reason to bring it back?
Maybe before we bring him back, he seems to be one of the most barbelled players on the team. You referenced the sort of aggregate composite metrics there. It did seem like once he came in, he was either missing a tackle or partner to a turnover in some respect, whether he was punching the ball out, whether he was recovering it, whether he was putting a critical block down, holding the guy up to get stripped or something like that. Early on, it seemed like we were getting a good trade out of it. As the season went on, it seemed like the missed tackles or the coverage missteps multiplied, and the number of turnovers or splash plays that he was a part of sort of dwindled. Again, it seemed like the first 3 or 4 weeks that he was here, he seemed to be a part of a big play every single week, and then that slowed down, and some of the missteps, became a bigger part of the story there. To your question of would I want him back, I think if he's willing to come back at the vet minimum, I would say yes, to be a part of that safety group we sort of alluded to earlier. Right. And maybe he edges someone else out at that point. If it's substantially more than that, I start to get more and more questionable. I truly don't know what the right number is. If it's 1 year at the $7 million we're talking about Humphrey for, I'm absolutely no. The indifferency point is probably closer to that vet minimum number, though.
2 years, $5.5 million.
I'd bid on that.
Okay. I think you end up paying kind of an above the minimum salary for a player you might really question whether he's actually in or out, not on game day, but in or out of your starting lineup. And whether he's even a part of your multiple package looks that you plan to play in a game. Now, certainly you could come in if there's an injury, and then it gives you that kind of insurance. And you want that kind of coverage on the offensive line, and you're willing to pay for it generally. One player a little bit more than the vet men to do that, like they do with McCary and actually I guess they didn't do it with McCary, right? McCary finished his 4 years and then he left. James Hurst would be a better example of a guy they paid an above vet min contract to stay around for extra time.
McCary got an extension, didn't he?
Did he with the Ravens?
I thought so. I could be misremembering here.
I have to go back.
Yeah, they gave him a 3-year extension in 2021 through 2024.
Okay, great.
Looking for the number. It's not immediately coming up, but they definitely signed McCary to an extension. But anyway, I think the value, I sort of didn't hesitate to say yes to 2 years, $5 or $5.5 million, whatever number he threw out there. I think probably the better value, because you have to keep in mind the value of 53-man roster spots here is probably actually as a best alternative to a negotiated agreement for some of your other guys like an Ardarius Washington, that he allows you to walk away from the table if Ardarius Washington demands, $7 million a year or something like that to come back.
Okay.
I'm probably not excited about him if it's at the, as an alternative to some of those other guys, but I like it as a, second choice or a bargaining chip to be able to drive the right bargain with some of them.
Let's be careful, because this is a position where the Ravens, outside linebacker has been another, where the Ravens have really lost because they've had kind of inert players at the position that they couldn't use in the way they needed them to be able to accomplish what they wanted to do in terms of packaging up their defense. So if you have David Ojabo active as your fifth outside linebacker and he never plays, and there was a whole bunch of that, he played 1 snap, he played 2 snaps, he's played 6 snaps kind of thing, then he doesn't help you any. There's no point in having him around. If he's just an insurance policy, I maybe even could be okay with that, but he should be inactive if you do that. And then when you have roster concerns, you got to think about his name. His name has got to come up every time in terms of, do you cut this guy and bring in that extra player that you need to play the position?
I'm not sure Gilman falls into that camp, though. They were obviously willing to play him almost to your and my chagrin over Starks in some situations. So I don't know if he's completely comparable to Ojabo in that regard. All
right. Well, fair enough. I think we've probably just spent enough time on him. Let's move on to Keandre Jackson. He played just 1 snap on defense. I think it was the last snap of a game. The other team might have even kneeled on it, but it was only 1 snap. Outstanding special teams player, 14 tackles, 3 missed. He did have 3 penalties on special teams, but he played on 5 different units, including the field goal block team, plus the 4 core units they always talk about. That's a special kind of a player who can really help you. And I'm with your earlier comment that, boy, would it be nice if they could get Keandre Jackson to actually find a role defensively that he could fill. It doesn't even have to be anything huge. Just if he could play dime back and they could leave Kyle Hamilton at slot on third down, that would be cool.
Yeah, absolutely. And it, in some ways, makes you wonder, is the wall that has existed between special teams only safety and playing on defense, is that something that the coaching staff is putting up? Is it that these players really can't play defense? Like, it does leave some questions there of what is the source of that there wasn't some role that could be carved out for a player like that who's showing tackling ability, showing ability to get to the ball on special teams. There's some transferable skill there, and maybe it's coverage, maybe it's something else, but if he's a safety by name on your roster, there's got to be some coverage ability there. It makes you wonder, what is the delta there? Or is he truly not able to do it? Or is it just, you've got him pegged as the special teams only guy, so that's why he's not getting that chance? Like, what's happening?
Okay, I'll just say the Ravens' DNA has never been what you're saying, that you keep a guy off the field because you can. In fact, the Ravens, much more their DNA has been, you're a great special teams player. We're going to find that other way in which you can contribute to our offense or defense. And in Tylan Wallace's case, they made him a great run blocker, and he had some receptions that helped. And Tez Walker, they made him a great special teams player first before he's become effectively a great receiver. This year, I think he's a lot of upside now entering year 3. And if you go back all the years, I mean, all of these safeties specifically have been guys that could move to dime. I mean, all the guys that got cheap late in the rounds, Haruki Nakamura, Chad Williams, and Jerome Sapp, and go back to Ralph Staten in their very first year, and the pickup of Corey Harris, and he became great, and Anthony Levine for all the years he played. They haven't had any problem finding a role for that guy. I think maybe what's blocking right now is that they really want Kyle Hamilton at dime. And it might mean that Keanu Jackson would have to prove that he could really play dime at a fairly high level, maybe like a Levine-esque level, to be able to push Hamilton back to dime on those obvious passing downs. Back to slot on those obvious passing downs.
And that's fair. And I wasn't suggesting that, to your point, that this isn't something that's been in the Ravens' DNA. It's more of a head scratcher, is I guess the way I wasn't articulating it very well of why this is happening. But I think what you just outlined, that the path to the dime snaps is probably more difficult than it has been in the past, given the presence of Hamilton, that a guy like Kane or a guy like Jackson has just a much more difficult path to proving they can play on the back end or something like that, versus carving out a role as a dime back or in some sort of sub package like that than guys in the past.
Yeah, the guy they really worked on to see if he could be that guy this year, in fact, there were 2 of them, were Kane and Brade. And they almost, and Lowry to a degree too. I mean, they gave all of these preseason opportunities to these guys. Jackson and Igbenhausen, who was the other guy who was in there during the preseason, were really sucking hind teat in terms of the opportunity to get snaps. And they had to wait very late into games before they'd even get on the field. I think that'll change both in camp and in the preseason this next year. And I think Jackson's great year on special teams will mean he'll have a very prominent role in terms of the preseason in 26 and trying to see if there's a way to get him on the roster and have a meaningful backup safety role.
Yeah, that would be great.
All right. 2025 needs a few things we'll just talk about, or 2026 needs, I should say. They need 2 more guys, I think, who can play the back end. One of them could be Humphrey. All right. And another possibility is that Ardarius Washington gets signed. If they got both of those guys, I think they might be in as good shape as they can reasonably, given that they're probably going to cut loose Gilman, or at least that's the way I'd see it working out. But I guess Gilman would be another one there that you try and find a way to get 2 of those 3 economically to stay. And Humphrey could even include a pay cut potentially.
Yeah, absolutely. If I'm planning out the offseason just for my own preferences, I think Humphrey staying around and carving out a role as, starting that move to safety, potentially emergency cornerback, that's one of them. And then Ardarius Washington would be my first choice. Obviously, if someone else sees something on tape and thinks they feel good about him from an injury perspective, there's not much we can do about that. And so maybe it's Gilman, maybe it's something else. But my kind of plan one would be, can you get Humphrey back playing safety and Ardarius Washington at a reasonably, team friendly 1 year prove it type deal. And if he's amenable to something more, that would be great. But I would have to imagine he wants to cash in at some point. So that would sort of be my inside track plan for two of those guys. And then ideally you go draft maybe a mid-round guy that you feel good about developmentally for the future.
Okay. All right. I think they still are in a position where they really could use another center fielder as a backup. Now, maybe that's Ardarius. Maybe they trust him back there as the guy. I don't think it's Gilman. I do think it could be Humphrey. I think it very well could be Humphrey, but they're going to have to need. They're going to need to not just stock up on strong safety guys, or we really don't need another strong safety / dime. If you have some combination of Ardarius and Humphrey on the team and Hamilton, that's just too much of that kind of a strong safety. I'm sorry, I should say strong safety / slot corner, but also strong safety / dime is a perfectly legitimate thing. They probably don't need more of. They need guys who can play the back end.
So you're saying you don't want more versatile safeties?
No, I don't want that. I don't want to hear. I don't even want to hear the word versatile attached to anybody new other than Humphrey or Washington, who have earned it and also I think can play the back end.
No, I'm
instincts over speed.
I was just gonna say I'm fully aligned with you. If it's a guy who I think you described it before as an elfin build who looks like he needs some time in the weight room, but can cover the heck out of the middle of the field and make a dark cloud over opposing offenses, that's the guy I want.
All right, I hear a lot of the bingo card for this year's draft in the statements you just made there.
I'm trying to fill it up.
Yeah. All right. What else is there to say? I think the Humphrey move to safety is the last really big thing that's on the table for 26. Maybe try and approach this as if you're Marlin. 2024, you're an AP1 outside corner, or AP1 slot corner. 2025, you have the worst season of your career by a wide margin, and you're last in PFF grade at the position. Now the Ravens come to you, and they might have two demands. Their first is, hey, Marlon, we want you to play for $4 million instead of $7 million this year, and we'll give you a chance to make that $3 million back in incentives. And but the big ticket item is here, we're moving you to safety. Does he say yes to that, or does he say, no, you might as well cut me right now and save yourself $7 million in cap space?
So this is there's a couple dimensions to this. I think one, I believe Marlon in the past has said that he has always seen or believes he will make the transition to safety at some point in his career. So that is a point in the favor of him possibly being amenable and not telling the team to kick rocks.
Yeah.
The other part of that is that, or another part of that rather, is that if you're a guy like Marlon, Hall of Fame's probably not happening.
Mm-hmm.
Ravens Ring of Honor is almost definitely happening.
Mm-hmm. And it's probably not in jeopardy, even if he were to be cut now.
It's not, but there's still, I think, some legacy cementing that could happen.
Mm-hmm.
And the difference between 4 and 7 million, I don't know. This is some of the work I do, and I could probably, if I spent some time with it, think through what the right sizing of the number is. But there is some non-trivial number that you can make lifetime earnings if you're at Marlin versus, staying all else equal, staying with the Ravens versus going somewhere else if it's the same exact dollars. And you possibly can make up that 7 to 4 that you just talked about, just pulling numbers out of the air. So that's a consideration. I think the major wild card here is something like, and there's a couple iterations of this, but Harbaugh to the Giants. Does he want to bring in locker room guys that he knows and loves and can be leaders, and as he builds the culture there, and that presents another alternative for a guy like Humphrey? And obviously he can't necessarily force a trade, but there are options for him out there, and maybe there's pull for him. That complicates the situation. I think putting that to the side, because that's impossible to predict, I think he would generally be amenable to at least the move. The pay cut obviously decrements that a little bit.
Mm-hmm.
And he has some power to say, no, just cut me. But I think there's a corresponding force in the opposite direction that he probably sees some value in being a lifetime Raven. But then again, this is all complicated by the fact that he has potentially some attractive landing spots. If I had to weight it, I would say there's probably like a
Okay, chance of the move, chance for accepting the pay cut. Give it to me as two separate numbers. I'm gonna
chance of the move to safety.
Yeah. So I've got a percentage chance for that, and now accepting the pay cut. Okay, I've got that too.
Chance of the move to safety, assuming no other outside factors, someone trading for him or anything like that.
Mm-hmm.
Accepting the move to safety, I would put at 70%.
Okay, I put it at 45.
Ooh.
I don't think it's an absolute guaranteed thing. I think he could have resistance to it because of the recent AP1 and the desire to maintain the high probability of career earnings that could still accrue to him if he had a bounce back year.
I guess, yeah. Fair. I think I guess there's also the difference here. Maybe I'm over-indexing on him saying that he sees the move happening someday. There's a difference between saying I would like to retire someday before I'm 65, and hey, it's your turn to retire at 50. Those are two different propositions.
Yes.
So
yeah,
being told it and dreaming about it someday. So that's fair. But then accepting the pay cut, 20%.
Okay, I had exactly 20 as well. So I think it's less than the chance of him accepting the move, and it would all be, of course, dependent on whether or not he does things. But if you're handicapping Humphrey's behavior since his end of season interview, so he apparently had some discussion at least with DaCosta when the season ended, and he said DaCosta gave him a percentage chance of being back. And Humphrey says, I like my chances. He's not willing to say what the number was.
He likes his chances of being back?
Yeah.
Okay.
So what that tells me is that first of all, that he understands that the Ravens may be in a position where they think the right thing is to cut him. And he also thinks that I can somehow either convince them or work with them to get them to keep me. I'm hearing both of those things kind of in his commentary. Now, clearly, the first hammer is in the Ravens' hands, but I believe Humphrey thinks that he can have an influence on this. And by the way, if you're Marlon Humphrey, because this happened to Jimmy Smith any number of times where they tried to kind of convert him to safety, and then he was going to play corner if they needed him, but he was a backup at both positions. And every freaking year they had to come back to Jimmy Smith being one of their starters on the outside because they ran out of cornerbacks. I virtually guarantee that will happen at some point during 2026, and Marlon's going to be asked to come in. It could be in the slot potentially if there's a problem with Hamilton. It could be on the outside if there's a problem, there. So I think it's incredible. It would be incredibly lucky for the Ravens to get through a year without the injuries necessary for Marlon to have to move back up front from a exile to the back end.
Yeah, that's a fair point. And the only other thing I would say about Humphrey, not to armchair psychoanalyze too much, but he's clearly a guy who I think is positioning himself for a post-playing media career. I think he's almost outright said that. I think that has a lot more legs if you're, and as we mentioned, he's already probably no risk of not being in the Ravens Ring of Honor, but that is probably a better chance of that working out for him if he continues to be longtime Lamar Jackson era Ravens stalwart Marlon Humphrey than Marlon Humphrey, who played on the Ravens for a lot of years, and then ended his career with the Arizona Cardinals.
Yes, exactly the team I was thinking about.
It's weird how that happens, right? Like,
it's like you're literally sent to the purgatory of the NFL, like Arizona Cardinals. It's not even in the division. It's not going to the Browns, and you're dealing with the crap there. Oh man. Okay. All right. Spencer, always great talking football with you. Got to cut it off. We've been over by a good amount here, but I really appreciate you coming on. Tell folks where they can talk football with you online.
You can find me on Twitter /X at Spenser CP, always looking to talk Ravens there. And the upcoming Orioles season. Excited for pitchers and catchers report.
All right, and that's Spenser with two S's, instead of a C, an S in that second spot.
Yep, SP and SER, and yep, and then CP.
All right. Outstanding. Other folks, please hit me up with your questions. #Filmstudy mailbag. I've been trying to direct these through to the right show. Sometimes I put out something before Friday morning GM, but this time of year where we're not talking about the offense or the defense and the news happens very quickly. It's always best if you can just get these questions to me in advance and I'll just direct them where they go. Because if I have to do a show about, who's the next Ravens head coach based on this interview that just happened, I'm going to do the show quickly. I'm not going to have time to ask people for questions and wait, several hours for responses to come back. So I really appreciate all that you guys have done in terms of listening to the show this year. And I hope you'll stay active and engaged during the off season. Spenser, thanks again for coming on.
Thank you.
And we'll talk to you next time on Film Study.